Welcome back to the channel. You are listening to Sheroy's voice, and this is the One Mic Podcast, episode 4. For anyone that's wondering why I didn't release an episode last week, I was getting some sun in Greece. And to be honest, it was a well-timed holiday after dropping points at home to Brighton. But on my way back from Greece, I forgot that I was wearing an Arsenal kit, and I was going up to passport control. Now, anyone that looks like me knows that going through immigration can sometimes be a bit of a nerve-wracking experience. And I give my passport to this Greek passport officer, and he looks up at me, and I've completely forgotten that I'm wearing an Arsenal kit. He looks up at me and just says, El Arabi. And I think he's commenting on my appearance, saying that I look like an Arab. I'm completely dumbfounded as to what's going on. And I think he can sense the shock on my face and says, no, Olympiacos. At which point I remember that in 2021, he's clearly an Olympiacos fan. In 2021, El Arabi scored at the Emirates, and they got a 1-0 win against us. And that put things into perspective for me on the way back when it came to Arsenal, because I sat there and thought there are people around the world that immediately, when they see an Arsenal fan, remember the time that they got a 1-0 victory at the Emirates in the Europa League in 2021. But since then, for us, we've been challenging for titles, and things like the Europa League, they're a somewhat distant memory. So I don't know, perhaps that has led to this episode being slightly more optimistic than it otherwise would have been had I recorded this immediately after the Brighton game, because needless to say, I think all Arsenal fans were, the manager was, and the players certainly were. We were down after that result. But let's deal with things in chronological order, because before the Brighton game came along, the transfer window closed. And the night that the transfer window closed, I actually saw a lot of season obituaries being written about Arsenal. And at that point, we were only 2 games in. And I mean, I'm sure a few of you will probably watch the Gooniverse podcast on James's channel, but I immediately go back to the episode that we did with Tom Canton and Babs, where I said, look, if we don't necessarily get the caliber of forward signing that we think we need, and we have a bad result against Brighton, there could be a dark cloud over the Emirates going into that Tottenham game. And I feel bad now because I feel like I probably spoke it into existence, but it seems as though that's exactly what's happened. The most notable signing, look, I'm not going to sit here and talk about Neto. I mean, look, we have a backup goalkeeper, fantastic, but for me, that doesn't move the needle. Let's talk about Raheem Sterling, because there's been a lot of debate as to whether the acquisition of Raheem Sterling, but also the departure of Eddie Nketiah, the departure of Reece Nelson, the departure, I mean, I know they don't occupy the same positions, but also the departure of Smith Rowe, the departure of Fabio Vieira. There is a lot of discussion as to whether we have actually strengthened the front line. Now, let me look at the Raheem Sterling deal in isolation for a minute. And I'm not usually a fan of removing context, but let's just take away the fact that we had a relatively low net spend. Let's just take away the fact that Gabriel Jesus isn't always fit. And let's just take away the fact that Erling Haaland is doing what Erling Haaland is doing. Raheem Sterling, if he can return to form that is anywhere near the level that we have seen him play at, could be a very, very important player. All right. And I'll come on to that in a minute. But the business in and of itself, I don't know if any of you, certainly the people that are from London, this definitely happens in London, it might happen elsewhere, but have you ever gone into Pret-a-Manger at around 4:45 p.m. on any given day? They'll have like a bunch of pastries and sandwiches and stuff, but they realize that they're about to go off and there's no real use for them. So they'll very often just say, you know what, just take it. And if that happens to coincide with a time of the day when you're hungry, you will take it. It's a good deal. It's a good deal. And if I'm looking at Raheem Sterling, the wage that we're paying him, and the fact that we didn't have to pay a loan fee, I think that is good business in isolation. Now, whether it fits into the context of chasing Manchester City, we can come on to. But that deal in isolation, I am perfectly happy with. That's the starting point for me with the close of the transfer window, okay? Now, what does Raheem Sterling bring? A lot of people talk about the seasons that he has spent at Chelsea. I'm going to be honest with you. I really don't see any utility in judging the ability of a player based upon his performances at a club that over the last 2 years, and usually I would say no disrespect, but because it's Chelsea, I mean absolute disrespect. It's a bloody circus. You don't know who's going to be in the squad. You don't know what formation they're going to play. You don't know what the result's going to be on any given day. You don't necessarily know who the manager is going to be in 6 months. I mean, there are so many variables there. It's just not conducive to a player being able to illustrate or demonstrate what he's capable of. All right. So I have to look at Raheem Sterling for what I've seen him do for England, what I've seen him do for Manchester City, because those for me are probably the fairest metrics. And also you have to take into account that he's coming into what is now a relatively stable Arsenal side, and he's playing under a manager that he's been very vocal about, playing under a manager that he trusts, and a manager that appears to trust him. Okay, what Raheem Sterling brings for me is, firstly, threat in behind. Threat in behind that I don't think we necessarily have outside of Gabriel Martinelli. He gives you another dimension on the break, which is something that I don't think we've been particularly good at over the years. And that actually sort of, in one way or another, came to fruition in the Brighton game, which we'll come on to. A lot of us have been complaining about the fact that Trossard, very good off the bench, but doesn't necessarily perform when he starts. A lot of us have been complaining about Martinelli not necessarily hitting the heights that we expected him to. And a lot of us have been complaining about the fact that Bukayo Saka doesn't have backup. Raheem Sterling has the potential. I'm not saying he definitely will. I'm not a clairvoyant. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not Mystic Meg. I can't look into the future. But he has the potential to address all of those problems, in that he's definitely a different kind of forward, or a different type of forward to Leandro Trossard. He has the experience, the nous, the know-how to perhaps teach Martinelli a thing or two about how to evolve his game. Maybe Raheem Sterling can show Martinelli that there is a little bit more to being a winger than getting your head down and running. Maybe that competition elevates Martinelli. The idea that this was meant to be Martinelli's season to try and get back into the first team and reach the heights that we all thought he could hit. Maybe the idea that someone could be gunning for that place could elevate him. And there's absolutely no question that if we do need to rotate Bukayo Saka, rest Bukayo Saka, Raheem Sterling's a capable option, and he's certainly an upgrade on Reece. So that deal in isolation, fine. But it's only for a year. As I've said, there is the concern as to how he performed at Chelsea. Now, for me, there's no utility in using that comparison, as I've said, but that is something that he's going to have to sort of dispel quite quickly if he's going to really be able to convince the wider world that he meant what he said in that unveiling video, where he sort of looks up and says, "You're going to see the best of me." But well, I have to put this in the context of the kind of transfers that I thought we could make, the longevity of the transfers, and whether they could perhaps elevate the first 11 to the extent that I think could be required to catch Manchester City and leapfrog Manchester City. When I say that, I'm immediately very often met with a lot of people saying, "Well, who would you buy? Who really moved? Who really moved in this window that was of that capability?" I don't want to get into the, well, if they don't want to move, you can make the move because we're Arsenal, even though I do see the force in that. But there is the odd signing that was made. Chelsea's another recurring theme here, but there is the odd signing that was made that I do think actually could have potentially elevated the starting 11. And it could have perhaps been a player that would have stuck around with Arsenal a little bit longer than Raheem Sterling, which at this stage seems like a one-year stopgap solution, but a decent one in my view. One of those signings, as an example, all right? I didn't expect Pedro Neto to go to Chelsea. And Pedro Neto is a player that I have been very, very keen on for a number of years, and I'm sure that he would have had a number of potential suitors. People talk about his price tag. That price tag was that high because it was Chelsea Football Club. Let's not get it twisted. When Chelsea come in to buy a player, it's like the affluent tourist that's on holiday in another country. Of course, the locals are going to try and fleece you because they know you've got money and they know you're going to pay and they know you don't know any better, right? That's what's happened there. I believe we could have got that deal done for a lot less than Chelsea. And I'm sure there are people readying their comments now going, "Oh, but he's injury prone. He's injury prone." Okay, he may well be. But I say this with the greatest of respect. Thomas Partey's injury prone. We've shown faith in him year after year after year, and he's now an integral part of our midfield, and certainly will be in the North London derby, looking at the numbers that we have. Gabriel Jesus is injury prone, but if anyone criticizes Gabriel Jesus' injury record, they're very often met with, yeah, but when he's fit, look at what he can bring. I put Pedro Neto in that same bracket. And going back to Thomas Partey, look, Thomas Partey, as we all know, didn't have an injury before he came to Arsenal and has had a shocking injury record since he's arrived. In that same vein, no, I'm no medical expert, but is it an absolute given that someone that's been injured at another club a fair few times is absolutely going to be injured throughout their tenure at another club? I don't know. But I'm using Neto as an example of the type of signing that I think might have been slightly easier to palate for the Arsenal fan base than Raheem Sterling. That being said, it is a big if. But if Arteta can get something near the best of Raheem Sterling out of Raheem Sterling, then actually I think that the net benefit to the squad could perhaps this season anyway be higher than it would have been had we brought in someone like Neto. But this dark cloud that I speak about with the transfer window, I think a lot of it stems from squad depth, not necessarily in quality throughout, but certainly quantity. It reminds me of, this might be a really stupid example, but I'm going to use it anyway. Has anyone ever done like a wardrobe clear out and just gone, yeah, I don't wear that. That fits, but I don't like it. That doesn't fit. Put everything in a black bag, taken it to the charity shop. But then in a few weeks, looked into their wardrobe and just gone, I don't have anything to wear. I really don't have that many clothes. I should have done that wardrobe clear out when I was in a position to go and buy new clothes. That is a concern with the amount of games that we're going to have to play. When we look at the Champions League, I mean, even the Atalanta game, I completely forgot that the Champions League was going to start that early. Plus the notion that you could be in a playoff if you don't finish in, I think it's the top 8 of this league. There's a lot of football to be played. And anyone that says that I'm being perhaps a little bit too skeptical about this, you don't need to listen to me. What do I know? Go listen to Mikel Arteta. He has said that we're like, what we're doing here, we are, again, relying upon luck a lot. I like the look of the squad. I like the balance in the squad. I think the squad is capable of achieving great things. But we said that last year we were very lucky that Saliba and Gabriel didn't get injured. We addressed it. However, in that front line, particularly down the middle, we know that Gabriel Jesus isn't always reliable in terms of his fitness. He's out now. That leaves us with one recognised striker, really. And even that guy is someone who was brought in to be a midfielder. Looking at the fact that we've let go of Eddie, Reece, Fabio, Smith-Rowe, I mean, I don't know about you, but in the Brighton game, my heart was in my mouth when Odegaard went down. I just thought, oh my God, who is going to play there? And that's something that we didn't really even speak about in the window because we felt we had other positions that we had to address. Perhaps because we thought that we could actually improve the first 11 in other positions, but we didn't think we could improve the first 11 with the Odegaard position. I get that. But look, I do worry that we're thin. And I'm gonna be unprofessional and look down at my phone here just to exemplify this. And I use Manchester City as the metric, not because I think that they're the only team that are capable of pipping us to the league. I mean, look at the way that Liverpool have started, for example. But let's just look at their bench in their 3-1 victory against West Ham. Their bench was Kyle Walker, Nathan Ake, Ilkay Gundogan, they had Nunez, John Stones, Rodri, Ortega, who we all know is a more than capable number 2, and then they have O'Reilly and McAtee. Now, O'Reilly and McAtee, bear in mind that these guys are on the bench because Phil Foden hasn't even been involved in the matchday squads yet. Last year's player of the season hasn't even been involved in the matchday squads yet, and these guys are pretty much perfect at the moment. And Oscar Bob, the breakthrough player, is injured. So those will be the 2 that occupy the bench. Now compare that with our bench for the Brighton game. Martinelli, Zinchenko, Calafiori. Okay. Kivior, Jorginho, Thetford, Lewis Skelly, Ranieri, Salahuddin. That, and I know that that's because there was an injury to Jesus, and I know that it's because Sterling was just watching from the stands, and I know that we've got an unfortunate injury with Mikel Merino. But those things do happen, okay? And I've just illustrated to you that Manchester City also have a notable injury and have a notable player that's not in the matchday squad. But that bench and that squad really does look like the kind of squad that could do damage in the latter stages of the season, when injuries do pick up, when legs do get tired, when it's crunch time. All right? Those three kids that are on that bench, I think they're brilliant prospects. I really do. And I was having this conversation actually whilst I was abroad. Someone said, well, during the Euros, a lot of people spoke about Lamine Yamal, for example, and said, well, if he was at Arsenal, he wouldn't even play because Arteta doesn't give academy players a chance. So which is it? Do you want him to give these academy players a chance and put them in the squad, or do you not? And I thought, you know what, that is a valid point. But this season is a very, very unique animal for two reasons for me. I've already spoken about the Champions League and the fixture congestion, so I'm not going to delve into that too much. But it is a very valid consideration. But the other is we are not in a position now with, Arteta at the half-decade mark, roughly, to be throwing away the domestic cups. There are going to need to be first teamers that play in those cups. And I think for the vast majority of the positions, we can probably map out a decent second choice alternative. But there are still quite a few where we can't. And when you get into the latter stages of those cups, again, you are going to come up against a hungry Arne Slot. You are going to come up against a guy that just accumulates trophies for fun in Pep Guardiola with a magnificent squad. I mean, I'm not saying that I consider this guy a threat, but dare I say it, Erik ten Hag takes these cups seriously, and you are going to come up against an Ange Postecoglou who knows he's probably not going to win the Premier League and he's going to try and get Tottenham a trophy. Everyone's going to be gunning for these domestic cups and we need to be taking them seriously too. That, I think, is where we have concern. However, for the last few years, we've been talking about Arsenal's recruitment and Arsenal's evolution taking place in phases. And this has to be, if not the last phase, one of the latter phases. And we've listened to that, and we've been very patient. The majority of the fan base have been very patient anyway. We've heard a lot of, we want more. We're not satisfied. We are going to learn from this pain. We are going to get better. Lots of podcasts have spoken about the idea that players need to go from boys to men. The issue with not recruiting a frontline striker, the issue with not necessarily, or maybe not, upgrading the starting 11 on the wings. All of this stuff about boys becoming men, this is where, in my opinion, Bukayo Saka needs to start. I'm not saying he's going to get these numbers, but he needs to start getting a bit closer to the Mo Salah numbers. Martinelli needs to be chipping in and pulling his weight. Trossard, I think, needs to just keep doing what he's doing from the bench. Now Raheem Sterling really needs to chip in. Kai Havertz has recently come out in that interview at TNT and said, no, I want 20. And I think he meant 20 in the league. Brilliant. And he's made a good start. And to be honest, I think for the vast majority of the season, if he stays fit, I can honestly see him starting 35 out of 38 games down the middle for us. So 20 goals with the amount of chances that we create ought to be very realistic for him too. Arteta needs to continue to improve these players. The coaching staff need to continue to improve these players. We did this a lot last January when we said we needed a signing. But in actual fact, what happened is we elevated a bit. And it led to a fantastic second half of the season. That's what we need to do this season. We need to continue elevating. These boys need to keep developing. We need to see these boys become men. And if that happens, then we're on very, very good footing. The reason I keep talking about the ifs and the hypotheticals is because there's just so much that remains to be seen this season. Some people call me positive, some people call me negative. I'm not entirely sure what I am. I just tell you how I feel, and I just keep it 100 with you guys. I'm not anywhere near a position to be able to say that we aren't going to win the Premier League this year. Is it more likely than not that Manchester City will, having won 6 of the last 7? Sure. But I still think we're a fantastic team. And I understand that we dropped points at home against Brighton, and I understand that has been exacerbated by the fact that Erling Haaland is doing what Erling Haaland is doing and Arne Slot is doing very well, but it's 3 games. It's 3 games, all right? I think one of the main reasons why there has been a lot of sort of negative commentary and punditry and whatnot around Arsenal transfer window aside is the Brighton game. Now let's look at the game in isolation. If you look at a game like that in isolation, forget the fact that you know that dropping points can mean you've lost the title against Manchester City. You can't think like that at this stage of the season, but I'll come on to that. If you're looking at a game in isolation, a team that's just beaten Manchester United, a team that looked very good under their new manager, you go down to 10, and it's, in my opinion, let me choose my words carefully, it's a decision that didn't have to be made. It's an unwarranted decision from that referee that alters the trajectory of the game. They do pin us back. Whether that's because we chose to invite pressure or whether that's because they applied it is perhaps a separate debate. But 1-1, you take it, you get the F out of there, and you move on, right? But we're now trained. I say trained, perhaps scarred. We're now perhaps scarred into looking at every drop point as the point that's going to lose us the title because we missed out by 2 points last year. We're now trained into thinking you have to be absolutely perfect in every single game to beat Manchester City. Now, I understand you have to be near perfect, and I understand that we can't keep accumulating these results. And I understand that really the Tottenham game now looks like, dare I say it, very early on, maybe a must-win or a must-not-lose, certainly, right? Valid. But we haven't lost that game. We haven't lost at the Etihad. We haven't had 5 draws. We haven't looked bad going forward. The catastrophizing that I've seen has, for me, been somewhat, it's just been a bit over the top for me. And I'm not saying that any of these concerns cannot come to fruition. I'm not saying that any of these concerns aren't valid. I'm just saying that it's a bit too early. That's all. Let's talk about the Rice decision. Now, I'm not going to sit here and because this podcast is coming out a week after. I'm sure you guys have listened to everyone talk about the letter of the law. You've heard everyone speak about, well, the ball was moving. You've heard people speak about, yeah, but he booted him. He should have got a red card. You've heard everyone speaking about he wasn't even aiming at a player. Like, it wasn't a genuine free kick. You've heard about everyone speaking about where the ball was and how it was inconsequential. I get all of that. Looking at common consensus amongst ex-players, footballing pundits, the vast majority, I personally feel I'm actually slightly more upset that he misses the North London derby than what happened in the Brighton game. But a lot of people disagree with me on that. If you look at whether we could have appealed that second yellow that led to a red, I think based upon common consensus, it would have been overturned. Because I think we could have made a very strong argument that in actual fact, even though they might call it delaying a restart, it didn't have the consequence that warrants a booking when talking about delaying a restart. It wasn't stopping a break. They weren't in a threatening position. I think we could have made a very well-articulated and valid, properly particularized argument and had that overturned. What is the rationale for not being able to appeal a red when it's a second yellow? You should be able, the severity of the punishment, I understand that there might be a slightly longer ban, but the severity of the punishment is you get sent off in that game, potentially drop points, and you miss a game. You should be able to appeal that too. There's no equivalence. And this is where I really don't like it. There's no equality of arms between the club and the Premier League. We can't appeal that second yellow. But the Premier League has the power to look at a second yellow whenever it wants and upgrade it to a red card of its own volition. If we're talking about the severity of the punishment, if we're talking about equality of arms and being on a level playing field, clubs should be allowed to appeal a second yellow where it has led to a red card that was unwarranted, in my opinion. And people talk about consistency. People talk about, no, it's a problem with the rules. I understand. This might sound very elementary, but whether we're talking about dives, whether we're talking about handballs, whether we're talking about delaying restarts, all I want in the game, you need rules. I understand that. All I want in the game is a little bit of common sense. a little bit of common sense, you know? And I think that could go a long, long way. And a lot of people have said it. I don't think we're going to see a second yellow or a red like that again, which is desperately unfortunate. Anyway, that was something that was not within our control to some extent. Some people might argue that Rice didn't have to do what he did. I don't want to get into that. We dropped points in that game, actually, for me, due to a number of things that were within our control, okay? We didn't adjust the midfield anywhere near quick enough after that red card. That ball that Lewis Dunk plays through, that ball that doesn't cut through the heart of our team if we have adjusted the midfield accordingly. That's exactly the type of thing that a midfielder like Declan Rice sweeps up. That ball doesn't get there, notwithstanding the fact that it's gone straight through Gabriel and Saliba too. Gabriel, for me, in that situation, I was initially very frustrated with him when I saw that he wasn't strong enough in that challenge, particularly because he is very often the antithesis of what he demonstrated in that challenge. Usually he's, not today. David Raya pulls off a very good save, and I'm not really here to listen to any arguments as to whether he could have parried it elsewhere or whatever. What really infuriated me when I watched that back, Thomas Partey jogging back and having an acute lack of awareness when we're talking about João Pedro darting into the box. Now, I said this in one of my WhatsApp groups, and I was met with, yeah, but Partey may not have got there, or he may not have been able to get in front of the man. Anyone who's played the sport knows that the man doesn't have to be in front of you. The man doesn't even have to be challenging you. The man just needs to be near you, and you're nowhere near as composed when you're finishing. It gives you something to think about. You might have to glance over your shoulder before you pull the trigger. All of those things could have led to João Pedro not burying that chance the way that he did. And that, for me, was probably the most egregious problem with the way in which we conceded that goal. And there was a discussion as to whether we invited pressure or not. But even though we did invite pressure, we defended quite well. And those two chances, let me know in the comments, am I being too harsh when I say that Kai Havertz actually did all of the difficult work brilliantly to create that one-on-one chance that he had? I actually think it was a very good save, by the way. I'm not saying it was some sort of pathetic finish. But in a game like that, where you know that chances are going to be few and far between, you have to have the capability and the presence of mind and the composure to put the ball out of the reach of the goalkeeper in that situation, for me. And again, that's not me saying that he's a bad player or he had a bad start to the season. Earlier in this episode, I said quite the opposite. But that was one. And the other, the Saka chance, look, I know he doesn't quite get there. Should he? Should he have? I don't know. Maybe that's just me being frustrated at the fact that we created opportunities that could have led to us winning the game and we let them slip. And I just hope that these aren't the kinds of things that we do look back on at the end of the season. But all in all, as I said, we look at the game in isolation. Just forget the fact that this could come back to bite us in the arse at the end of the season. If you think like that in every game, I mean, that means that Manchester City are in your head to the extent the title's probably already gone. If you're worrying about that, right? Erling Haaland said it himself post-match when he was asked by the Sky Sports pundits, oh, is this win sweeter because Arsenal slipped up? Even he looked at them and said, look, just don't use that language. They didn't slip up. You know, it's ridiculous in game week 3 for me anyway. Even though it was 2 points dropped, it's not a slip up in the title race. You know, we operate in extremes to such an extent that everything is the end of the world. Yeah, not ideal. Not ideal. But what better opportunity to remedy that, to get rid of any hint of a dark cloud, to fill a team with confidence going into the Etihad, than to go and beat Tottenham? This is a unique fixture, because if we're languishing in 8th and Tottenham are 2nd, if we're challenging for a title and Tottenham are languishing in 6th, it doesn't matter. The way that winning at their stadium impacts a fan base and impacts the confidence of the team, it's exponential. And that's one of the reasons why I feel like this game is a must-win, because that can absolutely rejuvenate all of the sort of negative sentiment and all of the negative connotations of the discourse that's been going on over the last. Winning this game can change all of that, right? And a lot of people, I alluded to the fact that I'm very upset about the fact that Declan Rice won't be playing in this game, or that I was particularly upset. I mean, I'll be honest, after the Brighton game, I was furious. I was absolutely furious about that decision. But We often say that Mikel Arteta takes great pride in buying players that are diverse. We often say that, well, Timber can play in midfield and can occupy a number of positions across the back four. We often say Havertz was an astute signing because he can play in midfield and he can play up front. We often say that, well, we understand that Zinchenko has defensive frailties, but what he can bring in midfield, if needs must, could be fantastic. Let's not forget we did extend Jorginho's contract as well. And let's not forget that we didn't bring in someone like Onana, who I think was fantastic and has gone to Villa. But we've now persisted with Partey, and he's probably going to go on a free at the end of this year. This is the sort of game where you have to look at, well, and actually, is it a game for an academy prospect in the middle? I don't know. I'm not a manager. Maybe that's the way that he goes. Is there any truth in the diversity argument? Is this where Arteta really earns his keep and says, okay, I might play Timber in here now. I'm going to show you why I have a thin squad, but it's because people can occupy numerous positions. Maybe that's what he does. Maybe that's what he does. And this is one thing that I've always said. Anyone that's listened to me on the Supporters Club on AFTV or any of the other platforms that I've been on, if having one player, any one player, not in your starting lineup means that you cannot go to a team like Tottenham and win, I understand why you may want your best 11 or may need your best 11 to sort of overcome an adversary such as Liverpool or Manchester City away. I understand that. But if one player means that you feel as though you can't go and win at the Lane, I know it's not called the Lane anymore, Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, then you're not really title contenders anyway. And let me be clear, I don't think that's the case. I think we're perfectly capable of going there and winning without Declan Rice. And when I get to my prediction, I think that's exactly what will happen. I do think that there is room for... The reason I float the idea... A lot of people say, why are you even talking about Timber or Zinni in there? Isn't it just Jorginho and Partey? If I'm looking at Madders, if I'm looking at Basuma, I'm not entirely sure that Partey's ever so slightly waning physicality and Jorginho's sort of, without sounding condescending, relatively non-existent physicality is the sort of midfield balance that you want. I think someone like Timber adds that level of physicality in midfield that we will need in a game like that, right? And Timber put out an interview on the Arsenal website today, I believe, or yesterday for you, saying that I want to make up for lost time. I want to make up for the time that I lost last season. And if that means playing in any position, then so be it. Maybe this is the game for it. And that could be something that Postecoglou's not expecting. Another potential wild card. So, I mean, Saka, if he comes back from internationals fit, he plays. Havertz likely plays down the middle. I know that he could play in the midfield, but with Jesus injured, is this really a game for a false nine? Maybe. That's another way that we could go. We do have options. Does Raheem Sterling start this game for you? Does Raheem Sterling walk into the starting 11 on the left-hand side, given that Martinelli hasn't necessarily started the season as strongly as he may otherwise have wanted to, and Trossard was given an opportunity to start? I know that it was adversely impacted by the red card, but it seems to be a familiar pattern with Trossard. Fantastic super sub, gets the opportunity in the starting 11, doesn't quite impact the game the way that he wants. Is it time for Raheem to turn up? Is it time for the boy from Brent to come up and do his thing? I don't know. I'm actually curious is probably the wrong word. I'm excited to see what the starting 11 looks like. I'm excited to see what we've been working on the training pitch for situations such as this. And all of this, obviously, all of this is only a conversation because of what can only be described as one of the bloody unluckiest injuries ever with Marino. I mean, why couldn't it have been someone slightly more slender that fell on him? Why did it have to be bloody Big Gabby? I mean, of all the people, had to be him and clasp his shoulder out. I mean, look, it's unfortunate, but these things happen during the course of a season, man. Don't forget, City won the league last year. They had Haaland out for a while, man. They had De Bruyne out for a while, man. They had Rodri out for suspension, whatever, for a few games. I know they lost those games, but they still got over the line in the end. That's what it takes. And I think that's what we're going to go out there and do. So my prediction for this game, look, I know it's hostile. I know Tottenham are coming off the back of a defeat and they're going to want to sort of prove their worth in front of their home fans too. 2-0 to the Arsenal for me. I think we react. I think we react well. I think we understand the significance of this game before the Etihad. And there is obviously the small matter of the away Champions League trip in between. 3 away trips in a row, by the way, when City have 3 home games in a row. I mean, we have been shafted there, haven't we? But I really do think that could be exactly what this team needs to sort of, I wouldn't say kickstart the season in the sense that it hasn't catastrophically faltered, but to really ensure that we march into the Etihad. And a lot of people are discussing the fact that, City are off to an absolute flyer, Erling Haaland scoring goal after goal after goal. And I know, but Erling Haaland, if I'm not mistaken, played in both games against us last season too. And they didn't score against us. And we have, I think even in the Community Shield, restricted his XG to near enough 0. So let's not forget the capability of this team, notwithstanding the fact the transfer window may not have been the fireworks that we wanted it to be, notwithstanding the fact that we thought we should have beaten Brighton. Let's not put ourselves down to the extent that we have this sort of inferiority complex or this little man complex. We are a good team and we're good enough to win both of these games. If you're asking me what I'd take at this stage of the season, I'd take a win at Tottenham and I'd take a draw at the Etihad. Call me defeatist if you want, but I think those results mean that you live to fight another day and you can then look at not only continuing an unbeaten run, but resuming a winning run that will get you somewhere near where you want to be at around Christmas time, because for me, the table's irrelevant until around 10, 15 games, roughly. For me, anyway, that's just me. Let's see. A lot is going on in the next 2 weeks. It is a big 2 weeks. It is a very big 2 weeks, not least because of the fact that, as it stands at the time of recording, Mikel Arteta is yet to sign his contract. I think at one point he said that he was going to deal with that after the transfer window. That closed. I think at another point he might have alluded to the fact that it was going to be during the international break. That's approaching the end. I might deal with that in a separate show, but I think there is something to be said for Mikel Arteta also wanting to maybe apply some pressure upstairs to say, yeah, I took the job when I was a yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir, unknown quantity, but I'm not an unknown quantity now. And when you look at the dearth of managers that are around, the fact that Liverpool struggled to get their first choice, the fact that Man United interviewed managers and couldn't get anyone better than Erik ten Hag that they thought was a good fit. When you look at Bayern Munich, looking at someone like Company, for example, there are a number of clubs that are, I'm not saying Maresca's a bad manager, but he's certainly not the caliber or as renowned as someone like Poch was, for example, or Chelsea managers of the past. Arteta could be sat there thinking, if I'm not going to get back at this point of the process, the bit that could be the tipping point, do I want to sign the contract as soon as it's put on the table, or do I maybe want to negotiate? I don't know. I might sound silly when this video comes out, but that is something that I want to delve into separately. Anyway, I hope that video didn't come across too negative. As I said, look at the Brighton game in isolation. It's okay. Look at the transfer window. It certainly could have been better. Don't get me wrong. But the acquisitions that we made could serve a very, very useful and potentially defining purpose. And I think we're going to beat Tottenham. So, wrong answers only. Last week's question was, why is Jack Grealish on the bench at Manchester City and not occupying the starting 11? I have to be honest with you guys. This is fast becoming the highlight of my week. Some of you might be saying I have a very sad life. You probably wouldn't be wrong, but you men are hilarious. So, why is Jack Grealish on the bench at Manchester City? Wrong answers only. Steve3780 says, it's because he refuses to take part in social outings with the squad. Of course it is. But my winner for this week, Cope 420. Because Pep asked him, how high are you? And he replied, no, Pep, it's hi, how are you? I thought that was genius. Cope 420, this week's wrong answers only comment of the day. And you can probably guess the teams that I have, I would say hate, but maybe that's a bit too strong. A strong dislike for by the teams that I target with these wrong answers only questions. I think it's only right after the performance against Liverpool that Casemiro is the subject of this one, don't you? The wrong answers only question for this week. What will Casemiro be doing in 2026? That is, what will Casemiro be doing in 2026? I've seen some of you guys reply in the body of the comments. I'm going to pin the comment, reply in there. Just makes it easier for me to identify them. Having said that, again, as I've said, I do have a relatively sad life, and I'm pretty sure I've replied to every comment that's been left on this channel. And I do that, honestly. I'm not just saying it. I do that because I love doing it. I love engaging with you guys. And I mean this sincerely from the bottom of my heart. Every comment, every view, every like, every subscriber, even the people that aren't engaging but are just watching. Thank you. The idea that anyone wants to listen to what I have to say is alien to me. And the fact that so many of you are doing it, it means the absolute world. I will be back next week, hopefully after a win against Tottenham. This has been the One Mic Podcast, and you have been listening to Sheroy's voice. Until next time.